Welcome to Unsolved Cases, where we dive deep into the most perplexing and haunting criminal cases in American history. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're exploring a case that has captivated the public imagination for over 7 decades. A murder so brutal, so meticulously executed, and so shrouded in mystery that it continues to baffle investigators and amateur sleuths alike. On a cold January morning in 1947, in a vacant lot in Los Angeles, a discovery was made that would forever change the landscape of American crime. The victim was a young woman with dreams of Hollywood stardom. The crime scene was so shocking that seasoned police officers struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. The investigation that followed would become one of the most extensive in LAPD history, generating thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of suspects, and countless theories. This is the story of Elizabeth Short, known to the world as the Black Dahlia. Her murder remains unsolved to this day, but the evidence tells a story of a young woman caught between fantasy and reality, pursued by obsession, and ultimately destroyed by forces that may never be fully understood. Today, we'll walk through every detail of this case, from the horrific discovery of her body to the complex web of relationships that defined her final days. We'll examine the cutting-edge forensic work that marked this as one of the first truly modern murder investigations. And we'll explore the psychological profile of a killer so methodical and skilled that some experts believed they had medical training. But this isn't just a story about death. It's a story about life in post-war America, about dreams deferred and love lost, about the dark underbelly of Hollywood's golden age, and about a young woman whose tragic end would make her more famous in death than she ever was in life. So settle in as we unravel the mystery of the Black Dahlia, a case that continues to challenge everything we think we know about crime, punishment, and the human capacity for both love and evil. If the mystery of the Black Dahlia has you hooked, you'll want to explore even more chilling, unsolved cases with Scoob. Available now on the App Store and Google Play, Scoob offers a wide range of true crime podcasts that dig deep into cold cases, forgotten investigations, and the secrets that still haunt history. Download Scoob today and uncover the cases that continue to defy explanation. Now, let's return to the Black Dahlia case and examine the morning that changed everything. January 15th, 1947. The sun was just beginning to rise over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the vacant lot at 39th and Norton Avenue in the Leimert Park neighborhood. It was a quiet Wednesday morning, the kind that promised nothing more eventful than another ordinary day in post-war America. But this would be anything but ordinary. Los Angeles Examiner journalist Will Fowler, son of renowned writer Gene Fowler, was monitoring police radio frequencies with his photographer partner Felix Pagel when they intercepted a dispatch call from the University Division. Something about a possible drunk in a vacant lot. In the competitive world of 1940s journalism, every call was potential front-page material. So Fowler and Pagel rushed to the scene. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Arriving before any law enforcement officers had secured the area, Fowler initially spotted something ivory white against the brown earth of the vacant lot. As he approached, the horrific reality became clear. This was not an inebriated individual, but a starkly naked corpse, completely drained of blood, and positioned in a grotesque spread-eagle position. In his memoir, Reporters, Memoirs of a Young Newspaperman, Fowler described that unforgettable morning with vivid, haunting clarity. The body was unmistakable in its lifelessness, a young woman who had been severed completely in half at the waist. Both halves of her body faced upward, her arms stretched above her head in what appeared to be a deliberate pose. Her semi-open, translucent blue eyes stared sightlessly at the morning sky. Out of respect for the deceased, Fowler gently closed her eyelids, a small act of human dignity in the face of unimaginable brutality. As Fowler examined the scene before police arrival, he noted details that would become crucial to the investigation. The woman's fingernails were neglected, suggesting she hadn't been able to maintain her appearance in her final days. Her hair was jet black, but careful observation revealed chestnut roots beneath the dye, a detail that would later help investigators understand her attempts to transform her appearance. But perhaps most chilling was Fowler's observation about the precision of the mutilation. The thoracic vertebrae had been cut through with surgical precision, leaving no bone fragments or granules behind. This wasn't the work of a frenzied killer hacking with crude tools. This indicated methodical separation by someone with anatomical knowledge and surgical skill. While Fowler processed these horrific observations, Pagel began documenting the scene with his speed graphic camera, capturing the isolated desolation of the location and the solemn figure of Fowler beside the corpse. These photographs would become some of the most important crime scene documentation in American history, though editors would later airbrush them extensively before publication. A blanket was digitally added to cover the woman's lower half, and her disfiguring facial wounds, notably deep cuts on each side of her mouth extending her smile into a grotesque grin, were discreetly concealed for public consumption. As Pagel continued his photographic work, the first black and white patrol car arrived on scene. Two uniformed officers approached Fowler cautiously, initially uncertain of his identity until he produced his press credentials. One officer had instinctively drawn his weapon, illustrating the tense atmosphere as more units began arriving to secure what was clearly a major crime scene. Recognizing the significance of what they had discovered, Fowler made his way to a nearby phone booth to relay updates to his city editor, James Richardson. When Richardson learned that the victim had been severed in half, he immediately understood the magnitude of the story and ordered Fowler to return to the office with the negatives for urgent processing. Driven by competitive journalistic instincts, Richardson decided to outpace other afternoon publications by preparing an emergency extra edition. This discovery would mark not just the beginning of one of America's most notorious murder cases, but also a watershed moment in crime reporting. The collaboration between journalists and law enforcement, the use of cutting-edge photography and communication technology, and the intense media coverage that followed would set new standards for how major crimes were investigated and reported. But for now, in that vacant lot on Norton Avenue, investigators faced a scene so methodically brutal that it would challenge every assumption about murder, motive, and the human capacity for evil. In 1947, identifying an unknown murder victim was typically a slow, painstaking process that could take weeks or months. But the Black Dahlia case would mark a revolutionary moment in forensic investigation, one of the first times cutting-edge technology would be used to rapidly solve the mystery of a victim's identity. The body discovered in the vacant lot was initially designated as Jane Doe No. 1, and LAPD detectives were desperate for any lead that could help them identify the victim of this gruesome murder. The precision and brutality of the killing suggested they were dealing with a particularly dangerous perpetrator, making swift identification crucial for public safety. Enter James Richardson, the enterprising city editor of the Los Angeles Examiner, who saw an opportunity to beat the competition while assisting law enforcement. During a strategic meeting with LAPD detectives, Richardson proposed using revolutionary new technology to transmit the victim's fingerprints across the country for rapid identification. The plan involved using a photo facsimile device, known as Soundex, to transmit the fingerprints over a proprietary communications network to the Examiner's Bureau in Washington, D.C. Once received, reporters stationed there would coordinate with FBI agents who were standing by to quickly carry the prints to the FBI's Identification Division for rapid processing. This unusual partnership between media and law enforcement illustrated the evolving relationship between press and police during critical investigations. The LAPD, equally eager for information, had no reservations about cooperating with the press when it meant potentially solving a brutal murder case. On January 16, 1947, just one day after the body's discovery, the plan was put into action. The International News Service facilitated the fingerprint transmission from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., representing a remarkable feat of technology and coordination for the era. An FBI memorandum dated June 24, 1947, now accessible through the Freedom of Information Act, provides detailed insights into this groundbreaking identification process. According to the memo, the fingerprint images reached the FBI's Identification Division by 11 a.m. And in a triumph of modern law enforcement technology, Elizabeth Short was positively identified within just 56 minutes, despite some prints being missing or blurred from the condition of the body. The speed of this identification was truly remarkable. The FBI's massive database contained approximately 104 million fingerprint cards, yet their expert technicians managed to locate and match Elizabeth Short's prints in under an hour. This rapid identification process was hailed as a triumph of modern technology and interagency cooperation, with the FBI director later highlighting this incident as an example of how such partnerships could aid in combating rising crime rates. Two sets of fingerprints in the FBI's files matched Elizabeth Short perfectly. The first card derived from her application for a job as a clerk at the Post Exchange of Camp Cook, California, on January 30, 1943. The second was from an arrest by the Santa Barbara Police Department on September 23, 1943, for violating juvenile court laws. She had been detained as a minor for being in a place where alcohol was served to adults, then released to the probation department. This rapid identification suddenly connected investigators with crucial details from Elizabeth Short's past. The arrest record from Santa Barbara, a city approximately 90 miles north of Los Angeles, provided not only confirmation of her identity, but also insights into her background and previous interactions with law enforcement. The technological achievement represented a significant leap forward in criminal investigation. For the first time, fingerprint identification could be accomplished across vast distances in a matter of hours rather than weeks. This collaboration between newspaper technology, FBI resources, and local law enforcement created a new model for rapid victim identification that would influence police work for decades to come. But even as investigators celebrated this technological triumph, they were about to discover that identifying Elizabeth Short was only the beginning of a mystery that would prove far more complex than anyone imagined. The young woman whose fingerprints had been matched so efficiently had lived a life filled with romantic entanglements, mysterious relationships, and a pattern of behavior that would make investigating her murder an incredibly challenging endeavor. With her identity confirmed, investigators could now begin the painstaking work of reconstructing Elizabeth Short's final days, tracing her movements, and identifying the people who had encountered her in the weeks leading up to her brutal death. With Elizabeth Short's identity confirmed, investigators could focus on the most disturbing aspect of the case, the condition of her body and what it revealed about her killer. The forensic evidence would prove to be both extensive and deeply troubling, painting a picture of a murder so methodical and brutal that it challenged everything investigators thought they knew about violent crime. The case attracted two of the most prominent forensic experts of the era, Ray Pinker, a criminalist for the LAPD, and Dr. Lemoyne Snyder, a distinguished figure who was both a medical doctor and a lawyer, and a recognized authority on homicide investigations. Together, they would conduct one of the most thorough forensic examinations in criminal history. Pinker accompanied the original autopsy of Elizabeth Short on January 16, 1947, and the case marked a turning point in forensic investigation, as it was among the first to use the LAPD's state-of-the-art equipment for capturing high-resolution color photographs to document both the crime scene and the extensive trauma in unprecedented detail. Their analysis of the autopsy photographs and tissue sample enlargements led both experts to a startling conclusion. The perpetrator possessed advanced knowledge of anatomy and remarkable surgical skill. This finding was significant because it dramatically narrowed the pool of potential suspects, suggesting the killer had some form of medical training. Pinker noted from the outset that the body had been cut in two with extraordinary precision. The victim had been severed at the waist without damaging any internal organs, a feat that required not just anatomical knowledge, but also access to proper surgical instruments. The clean incision indicated that whoever was responsible had an exceptional understanding of human anatomy and considerable surgical experience. But the forensic evidence revealed even more disturbing details that investigators kept carefully hidden from the public. An undisclosed report by Frank Jemison, an investigator with the district attorney's office, contained crucial information that had been shielded from public knowledge. This undated report, part of grand jury files, outlined gruesome details that only the killer and a select few officers involved in the investigation would know. The report revealed that a piece of flesh weighing approximately 1 pound had been surgically excised from the front of Elizabeth Short's left thigh. Additionally, various other smaller lacerations and cuts were present throughout the body. These details were kept secret because investigators believed they could only be accurately explained by the perpetrator of the murder. During police interrogations, investigators focused on two pivotal questions that served as their litmus test for suspects. What happened to the victim's pubic hair, and what became of the piece of flesh cut from her left thigh? These were details that only the killer should know. A memorandum written by Jemison and dated October 28, 1949, addressed to H.L. Stanley in the district attorney's office, provided the horrific answer. The flesh removed from the thigh had been inserted into the victim's vagina, while her pubic hair was discovered in the rectum. This level of post-mortem mutilation suggested a killer with profound psychological disturbance and possible sexual motivation. The forensic evidence became even more complex when conflicting reports emerged about additional mutilations. Officer Mary Unkefer contended that Elizabeth Short had a rose tattoo in the exact spot from where the flesh was removed. Dr. DeRiver, during a 1953 interview with writer Donald Freed, stated unequivocally that the killer had removed this rose tattoo and that certain suspects were aware of its significance. Additionally, there were disputes about whether cigarette burns were present on the body. Dr. DeRiver claimed there were cigarette burns on Elizabeth Short's body during his testimony to the grand jury, but Jemison's memorandum contradicted this assertion. Author Steve Hoddle later mentioned being given an autopsy photograph by Lieutenant Harry Hanson's daughter that allegedly showed cigarette burns, suggesting possible evidence tampering or conflicting interpretations of the forensic findings. Crime novelist Craig Rice, a prominent figure of the era, recognized the sophisticated nature of the mutilations and dedicated an entire chapter to the case in his book, 45 Murderers. Rice highlighted the professional skill evident in the manner Elizabeth Short's body was dissected, corroborating the findings of Pinker and Snyder. The forensic evidence painted a picture of a killer who was not only psychologically disturbed, but also possessed technical skills that suggested medical or anatomical training. The precision of the bisection, the surgical removal of tissue, and the methodical nature of the post-mortem mutilation all pointed to someone with access to proper instruments and knowledge of human anatomy. This evidence would shape the entire investigation, leading detectives to focus their attention on suspects with medical backgrounds, while simultaneously trying to understand the psychological profile of someone capable of such calculated brutality. One of the most challenging aspects of the Black Dahlia investigation was reconstructing Elizabeth Short's movements in the days leading up to her murder. Initially, investigators faced what appeared to be a mysterious gap in the timeline between January 9th and 15th, 1947. However, a closer examination of the evidence reveals a much more complex and troubling picture of her final week. The Los Angeles Police Department issued what was officially designated as a wanted information bulletin, not a missing persons report, but a request for information compiled and distributed 4 days after Elizabeth Short's body was identified. This bulletin was distributed among patrolling officers and detectives during roll call meetings, urging them to find potential witnesses who might have interacted with or seen Elizabeth Short during the critical time frame. The bulletin explicitly requested officers make inquiries at various local venues, such as hotels, motels, apartment complexes, cocktail bars, lounges, and nightclubs to trace Elizabeth Short's whereabouts from January 9th through 15th. This systematic approach would prove remarkably effective. By January 21st, just 5 days into the murder investigation, LAPD officers had conducted extensive inquiries across the city following the bulletin's instructions. Their efforts yielded substantial results. 12 confirmed credible sightings of Elizabeth Short occurring each day from January 9th to January 14th. Notably, 6 of these witnesses were personal acquaintances of Short, providing greater reliability to their testimonies and making it virtually impossible for them to have been mistaken about their sightings. These witnesses recorded their observations in official statements submitted directly to the Los Angeles Police Department in January 1947, and these accounts were subsequently published in various Los Angeles newspapers following the discovery of Short's body. Elizabeth Short's documented presence covered a detailed timeline, with sightings reported at 12 different locations over the 5-day period, spanning a footprint from Hollywood to downtown Los Angeles, a range of approximately 4 to 9 miles. The fact that half of these witnesses knew her personally significantly strengthened the reliability of their claims and completely undermined any theory that Elizabeth Short had been missing for an entire week before her death. Instead, the evidence suggested she had been moving freely throughout Los Angeles, maintaining her normal patterns of social interaction until very close to the time of her murder. However, significant uncertainty still clouded these final interactions, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Was Elizabeth Short being watched or followed during these final days? Was she meeting with someone who intended to harm her? Or did she unknowingly encounter her killer during routine activities? These lingering uncertainties deepened the enigma surrounding her death and made each new discovery more puzzling than the last. The sightings painted a picture of a young woman who was socially active and maintaining regular contact with friends and acquaintances throughout her final week. This evidence suggested that whatever happened to Elizabeth Short occurred rapidly and without warning, rather than being the result of a prolonged captivity or extended period of danger. This timeline would prove crucial to the investigation, as it meant that investigators needed to focus their attention on Elizabeth Short's activities and associations during a very specific and limited time frame. The killer had encountered her sometime between her last confirmed sighting on January 14th and the discovery of her body on the morning of January 15th, a window of perhaps 12 to 18 hours. Before we continue with the witnesses who shaped our understanding of Elizabeth Short's final days, a quick note for those who can't get enough of true crime's deepest mysteries. If cases like the Black Dahlia captivate you, then Scoob is your next obsession. Available now on the App Store and Google Play, Scoob features gripping, investigative podcasts that explore infamous cold cases like the Zodiac Killer, the Unabomber, and many more. Download Scoob today and keep chasing the truth. Returning to the Black Dahlia case, let's hear from the people who saw Elizabeth Short in her final fateful days. The witnesses who came forward during the investigation provided a haunting glimpse into Elizabeth Short's final days, painting a picture of a young woman who seemed to be living under increasing stress while maintaining her social activities. Their testimonies would become crucial pieces of evidence in understanding both her state of mind and the circumstances that led to her death. Paul Simone, a painting contractor working at the Chancellor Hotel on Saturday, January 11th, 1947, provided one of the most significant witness accounts. This was the same hotel where Elizabeth Short had stayed in room 501, alongside 7 other women the previous December. While engaged in his work, Simone reported hearing an intense argument coming from the back area of the hotel. Investigating the commotion, Simone discovered Elizabeth Short engaged in a heated exchange with another woman who was vociferously cursing at her. According to Simone's account, the argument appeared to be escalating toward physical confrontation. As he approached, the second woman glanced at him dismissively and exclaimed, "Oh, nuts to you!" before storming out of the hotel. Following this encounter, Elizabeth inquired about a rear exit to leave the premises discreetly, but when informed there was none, she accompanied Simone to the front entrance, where she entered a waiting taxi. This incident suggested that Elizabeth Short may have been involved in conflicts or disputes that made her feel the need to leave locations discreetly. The heated argument and her subsequent request for a back exit indicated she was experiencing interpersonal tensions that made her uncomfortable with normal departures. A. Jorgensen, a Los Angeles taxi driver, provided crucial testimony about Elizabeth Short's whereabouts on the night of January 11, 1947. Jorgensen recounted that his cab was stationed near the Rosslyn Hotel at 6th and Main Streets in downtown Los Angeles, when a man and a woman, whom he definitively identified as Elizabeth Short, boarded his vehicle. The man instructed Jorgensen to take them to a motel in Hollywood. However, police authorities deliberately did not disclose information about the man's description or the name of the motel to the press, opting to conduct follow-up investigations and interviews with motel employees first. This suggests that investigators considered this sighting particularly significant and wanted to pursue leads privately before releasing details that might compromise their investigation. Another witness, referred to by police as John Doe No. 2, was a gas station attendant at the Beverly Hills Hotel who claimed to have seen Elizabeth Short in the early morning hours of January 11th. Around 2:30 a.m., he observed a 1942 tan Chrysler Coupe pull into the service station for refueling. He confidently identified Elizabeth Short from police photographs as being present in the car's back seat, appearing visibly upset and scared. This witness also noted a second woman in the vehicle wearing dark clothing and described the male driver as approximately 30 years old, measuring 6 feet 1 inch and weighing about 190 pounds. The fact that Elizabeth appeared upset and scared in this sighting was particularly significant, as it suggested she may have been in distress or danger even days before her murder. Perhaps most intriguingly, Mr. and Mrs. William Johnson, owners and resident managers of a hotel at 300 East Washington Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles, were identified as crucial witnesses whom police did not publicly disclose. On January 12th, they reportedly saw Elizabeth Short in the company of a man who investigators believed was likely involved in her homicide. Even more significantly, they witnessed the same suspect again on January 15th, after Elizabeth's body had been discovered. According to the Johnsons' accounts, on Sunday, January 12th, around 10 a.m., a man fitting the description of 25 to 35 years old, with medium complexion and medium height, approached their hotel desk, seeking a room. The fact that the Johnsons saw this same individual again after the murder was discovered suggests either that he was brazenly returning to the scene of criminal activity, or that he had legitimate reasons to be in the area that coincidentally placed him there during both the pre-murder and post-murder periods. This witness account would have been crucial to investigators, though the specific details of their subsequent encounters were kept confidential. These witness testimonies created a complex picture of Elizabeth Short's final days. A young woman who was socially active and moving throughout Los Angeles, but who also appeared to be experiencing conflicts, stress, and possibly fear. The witnesses described her as being in the company of various men, some of whom may have been causing her distress or concern. The pattern that emerged was of a young woman whose social life brought her into contact with multiple individuals, any of whom could have been connected to her eventual murder. The investigation would need to carefully examine each of these encounters to determine which represented normal social interactions and which might have led to her tragic death. To understand Elizabeth Short's murder, investigators had to first understand Elizabeth Short herself, a complex young woman whose life straddled the line between reality and fantasy, whose behavior patterns would provide crucial insights into the circumstances that led to her death. The picture that emerged from witness testimonies and FBI reports revealed someone whose personality and lifestyle choices may have made her particularly vulnerable to predatory behavior. One of the most illuminating accounts came from an unidentified FBI witness who spent time with Elizabeth during September 1946, just months before her murder. This witness, identified in FBI files as Sergeant John Doe, provided detailed insights into Elizabeth's personality and social behavior that would prove crucial to understanding her final months. The sergeant first encountered Elizabeth through a mutual friend, and together they attended a live Tony Martin broadcast at CBS radio studios before going to Tom Brenneman's restaurant at the famous corner of Hollywood and Vine. When they arrived at the restaurant, despite a long queue of people waiting for tables, the headwaiter immediately ushered them inside and seated them at a table. This suggested that Elizabeth was a familiar patron, and indeed, all the waiters appeared to recognize her and were quite cordial. During their meal, Sergeant Doe observed that numerous patrons seemed to gaze at Elizabeth, taking note of her elegant attire and whispering amongst themselves. Many appeared to recognize her, possibly mistaking her for an actress associated with RKO or another movie studio. This observation revealed something significant about Elizabeth's appearance and demeanor. She carried herself in a way that made people assume she was already part of the entertainment industry. Elizabeth shared stories about her past during dinner, including anecdotes about her childhood sweetheart from Medford, Massachusetts, reminiscing about how he had been notably jealous during their youth and had instructed her not to entertain other potential suitors. This glimpse into her romantic history suggested a pattern of relationships marked by possessiveness and control. Throughout dinner, Elizabeth demonstrated the social behavior that would become a recurring theme in witness accounts. Sergeant Doe noted that she was quite sociable and inclined to engage with anyone she encountered. Earlier that day, when they had traveled by bus to Hollywood, Elizabeth had immediately initiated conversation with a Marine sitting next to her, showing her natural tendency to strike up conversations with strangers. However, the evening took a dramatic turn as they walked back toward downtown Los Angeles. After exiting their trolley about 5 blocks from the Figueroa Hotel, a black car suddenly pulled up alongside them. Sergeant Doe recalled seeing 5 men inside the vehicle, all of whom appeared to be of dark complexion and possibly of Mexican descent. 3 of these men jumped out of the car and shouted, "There she is!" When Sergeant Doe suggested confronting the men, Elizabeth instead urged him to flee, which they did hastily. This incident suggested that Elizabeth was either being followed or that she had reason to fear certain individuals. The fact that the men specifically identified her with "there she is" indicated this was not a random encounter. Upon reaching the hotel, Elizabeth requested that Sergeant Doe wait outside for approximately 20 minutes while she went to her room, citing the hotel's stringent regulations. This behavior pattern of being cautious about male visitors and hotel rules suggested she was experienced in navigating the social restrictions of the era while maintaining her independence. The sergeant spent the night with Elizabeth, noting that while they were intimate multiple times, she never appeared to be in a particularly passionate mood. This observation, combined with other evidence, suggested that Elizabeth may have used her sexuality strategically rather than purely romantically, perhaps as a means of securing protection, accommodation, or other benefits. During their brief relationship, Elizabeth revealed some crucial information about her state of mind and living situation. She confided that she had apprehensions about wandering the streets of Los Angeles alone at night, and had shown him a newspaper detailing a spate of murders and rapes occurring in the city. This indicated she was aware of the dangers around her and felt vulnerable. Perhaps most significantly, Elizabeth disclosed that she was involved with a man she didn't particularly like, but felt unwilling to hurt his feelings by ending their relationship. Unfortunately, Sergeant Doe could not recall this man's name, but this revelation suggested Elizabeth was in a relationship that was causing her distress, and that she felt trapped by her own compassion or fear of confrontation. Elizabeth's behavior revealed a young woman caught between survival and aspiration, using her charm and sexuality to navigate a dangerous world while harboring dreams of stardom that led her to frequent places where she might be discovered. Her tendency to engage with strangers, combined with her apparent need for protection and support, created a lifestyle that brought her into contact with numerous men, any of whom could have posed a threat. The psychological profile that emerged was of someone who lived partly in fantasy, creating elaborate stories about her past while struggling with the harsh realities of life in 1940s Los Angeles. This combination of vulnerability, social engagement, and romantic entanglements would prove to be a dangerous mix in the weeks leading up to her murder. Elizabeth Short's romantic life was a complex tapestry of relationships that revealed both her desperate search for love and security and the dangerous patterns that may have ultimately led to her death. Her relationships were marked by fantasy, loss, and increasingly risky behavior that brought her into contact with men who may not have had her best interests at heart. The foundation of Elizabeth's romantic worldview was established during World War II with her relationship with Major Matthew Gordon, Jr., a member of the famous Flying Tigers. When President Truman urged Americans to commemorate VE Day with restraint and acknowledgement of the heavy sacrifices made to defeat Hitler, Elizabeth was among those eagerly anticipating the homecoming of her fiancé. However, her joy was shattered 3 months later by a devastating telegram from Matt's mother, reporting that the Army War Department had informed them of Major Gordon's death in a plane crash over India. Elizabeth's dreams crumbled as she received condolences from his family, though they maintained a glimmer of hope that the news might not be true. This traumatic loss would shape Elizabeth's subsequent relationships and her increasingly tenuous grip on reality. In the aftermath of the gruesome murder, Mrs. Gordon sought to minimize her son's relationship with Elizabeth, indicating that she had never truly believed Elizabeth was genuinely engaged to Matt. According to Mrs. Gordon, the condolence message sent to Elizabeth was merely a kind gesture extended to all of Matt's acquaintances, casting doubt on whether their engagement had ever been as serious as Elizabeth believed. This revelation highlighted a disturbing pattern in Elizabeth's life: the tendency to romanticize relationships and create elaborate fantasies about her romantic connections. Among Elizabeth's possessions were love letters that she had written but never mailed, further illustrating the gap between her romantic fantasies and reality. Her landlady, Elvira French, noted Elizabeth's proclivity for lounging at home, immersed in writing letters that detailed elaborate tales of a past marriage, a pilot husband, and a lost child. For Elizabeth Short, the line between fantasy and reality became perilously vague. The imagined worlds she created were more vivid and captivating than the dreary existence she experienced, and each tale she crafted was a means of escape, offering her the chance to reimagine her existence as a grand film, where she played the central role of a tragic heroine. Following Matt's death, Elizabeth entered a whirlwind of brief, romantic entanglements that revealed an increasingly desperate search for love and security. These relationships included flirtations with Tim Maringer, a married pilot stationed at Jacksonville Naval Air Station, and Lieutenant Stephen Wolak, an Air Force officer in El Paso. Among other military acquaintances was Paul Rosie, but most notable was her rekindled relationship with Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Gordon Fickling. Fickling, an experienced B-24 pilot who had served during the war, was working as a commercial airline pilot on routes between North Carolina and Chicago when Elizabeth re-entered his life. Her pursuit of this relationship demonstrated the lengths to which she would go to maintain romantic connections. She followed Fickling across the country, moving to Indianapolis in June 1946, and eventually to Long Beach, after a brief stint in Chicago in July. In Long Beach, Elizabeth stayed at the Washington Hotel on Linden Avenue before eventually moving to a furnished apartment that Fickling provided for her. During her stay, Elizabeth garnered a reputation for wearing provocative black attire while frequently visiting a nearby drugstore soda fountain. The druggist noticed her interactions with an Army lieutenant who seemed to become possessive when she entertained the company of various sailors. Similarly, the Washington Hotel's manager remembered an Army man visiting Elizabeth multiple times, noting an instance where a sailor was present that incited the man's jealousy. This pattern of simultaneous relationships with multiple men revealed Elizabeth's survival strategy, maintaining connections with several potential sources of financial and emotional support while playing them against each other. However, this strategy proved increasingly dangerous. Fickling eventually decided to end their affair, acknowledging that Elizabeth's simultaneous relationships with other men drove him to distress. The jealousy and possessiveness that her lifestyle generated among her various suitors created a volatile situation where emotions ran high and conflicts were inevitable. Elizabeth's romantic patterns revealed a young woman trapped between her need for security and her inability to maintain stable, honest relationships. Her tendency to create fantasies about her romantic connections, combined with her practice of maintaining multiple relationships simultaneously, created a web of deception and jealousy that may have ultimately contributed to her murder. The men in Elizabeth's life represented both her lifeline and her greatest danger. While she depended on them for financial support, accommodation, and emotional connection, her manipulation of these relationships and her inability to commit exclusively to any one person created enemies and rivals who may have viewed her as a threat or an object to be possessed. As investigators would discover, unraveling Elizabeth Short's romantic entanglements would prove to be one of the most challenging aspects of the case, as the line between protective lover and dangerous predator became increasingly blurred in the complex world she had created around herself. As the investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder intensified, detectives found themselves pursuing leads that seemed to multiply exponentially. The precision of the killing, combined with the complex web of relationships in Elizabeth's life, created an investigation unlike any the LAPD had previously encountered. Every lead seemed to generate 3 more, and every suspect eliminated revealed 2 new possibilities. The forensic evidence had established that investigators were looking for someone with medical or anatomical knowledge, someone who possessed not only the skill to perform such precise mutilation, but also access to proper surgical instruments. This profile significantly narrowed the field of potential suspects, while simultaneously making the investigation more complex, as medical professionals were typically considered upstanding members of the community. Ray Pinker's analysis of the crime scene and autopsy evidence had been instrumental in establishing the professional nature of the killing. His expertise across multiple forensic disciplines, including chemistry, ballistics, trajectory analysis, and polygraph examination, brought a new level of scientific rigor to the investigation. Pinker's work represented a turning point for the LAPD, effectively bringing the department into the modern era of forensic investigation. The partnership between Dr. Lemoyne Snyder and Pinker provided additional credibility to their conclusions about the killer's medical background. Snyder's reputation as both a medical doctor and lawyer, combined with his recognized authority on homicide investigations, lent significant weight to their assessment that the perpetrator possessed extraordinary anatomical knowledge and surgical skill. However, the investigation was complicated by the emergence of crucial evidence that was deliberately withheld from public knowledge. Frank Jemison's undisclosed report to the district attorney's office revealed details so specific and disturbing that investigators believed only the killer could accurately explain them. The strategic withholding of information about the flesh removed from Elizabeth's thigh, and the positioning of her pubic hair became crucial tools in interrogating suspects. These withheld details served as a litmus test during police interrogations. When suspects were questioned about what happened to the victim's pubic hair and what became of the piece of flesh cut from her left thigh, their responses would either eliminate them from consideration or move them higher on the suspect list. This investigative strategy represented sophisticated police work for the era, demonstrating an understanding of how to use exclusive knowledge to identify the perpetrator. The investigation was further complicated by conflicting accounts of additional evidence. The dispute over whether Elizabeth Short had a rose tattoo in the location where flesh was removed, and whether cigarette burns were present on her body, created confusion within the investigative team. These discrepancies suggested either evidence tampering, conflicting interpretations of forensic findings, or deliberate attempts to discredit certain testimonies. Dr. DeRiver's claims about the rose tattoo and cigarette burns, combined with allegations that Lieutenant Harry Hansen had improperly retained autopsy photographs, suggested that the investigation may have been compromised by internal conflicts or procedural violations. If accurate, this indicated serious breaches of protocol that could have jeopardized the entire case. The technological innovations employed in the investigation, from the rapid fingerprint identification using Soundex transmission to the high-resolution color photography of the crime scene, represented cutting-edge police work for 1947. However, these advances also created new challenges, as investigators struggled to integrate traditional detective work with emerging forensic technologies. The extensive witness canvass that generated 12 confirmed sightings of Elizabeth Short during her final days demonstrated the thoroughness of the LAPD's approach. However, this comprehensive timeline also revealed the complexity of Elizabeth's social life and the numerous individuals who had encountered her in the days leading up to her murder. Each witness account required follow-up investigation, and each new lead had the potential to completely redirect the investigation. The collaboration between the Los Angeles Examiner and law enforcement, while successful in rapidly identifying the victim, also created unprecedented media attention that would complicate the investigation. The intense public interest in the case generated thousands of tips, confessions, and theories that investigators had to evaluate, stretching department resources and potentially compromising the investigation's focus. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that solving Elizabeth Short's murder would require not just identifying the killer, but understanding the complex psychological and social dynamics that had brought victim and perpetrator together. The case would ultimately challenge every assumption about motive, opportunity, and the relationship between investigative methodology and media coverage. The Black Dahlia investigation represented a watershed moment in American criminal justice, a case that demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of emerging forensic science, while highlighting the enduring importance of traditional detective work in solving complex crimes. As we near the end of our examination of the Black Dahlia case, we must confront a sobering reality. Despite one of the most extensive investigations in LAPD history, despite cutting-edge forensic analysis, despite hundreds of interviews and thousands of tips, Elizabeth Short's murder remains unsolved over 7 decades later. The evidence we've examined paints a clear picture of what happened to Elizabeth Short, but it also reveals why her killer has never been brought to justice. The precision of the murder, the methodical disposal of evidence, and the killer's apparent medical knowledge all suggest someone who planned the crime carefully and possessed the skills necessary to avoid detection. The forensic evidence established that investigators were looking for someone with advanced anatomical knowledge and surgical skill, someone who could bisect a human body without damaging internal organs, someone who had access to proper medical instruments, and someone who possessed the psychological capacity to perform extensive post-mortem mutilation. This profile describes an individual who was likely intelligent, educated, and possibly respected in their community. The complexity of Elizabeth's social life and romantic entanglements created a vast pool of potential suspects, each with their own motives and opportunities. Her pattern of maintaining simultaneous relationships with multiple men, combined with her tendency to create elaborate fantasies about her romantic connections, generated jealousy, possessiveness, and conflict that could have provided numerous motives for murder. The withheld evidence about the flesh removed from her thigh and the positioning of her pubic hair suggests that investigators had specific knowledge that could have identified the killer, yet no suspect was ever charged. This implies either that the killer was never interviewed by police, that they were skilled enough to avoid revealing their knowledge during interrogation, or that they were protected by circumstances beyond the investigation's reach. The conflicting accounts about the rose tattoo and cigarette burns reveal internal inconsistencies in the investigation that may have compromised its effectiveness. Whether these discrepancies resulted from evidence tampering, witness confusion, or deliberate obstruction, they created doubt about crucial forensic evidence that could have led to conviction. The timing of Elizabeth's murder, occurring during an era when forensic science was advancing rapidly, but criminal investigation techniques were still developing, meant that evidence may have been collected that couldn't be properly analyzed with available technology. DNA analysis, computer databases, and other modern investigative tools that might have solved the case were decades away from development. The intense media coverage that began with Will Fowler and Felix Pagel's early arrival at the crime scene may have both helped and hindered the investigation. While publicity generated numerous tips and witness accounts, it also created a circus atmosphere that may have encouraged false confessions and unreliable testimony, while potentially alerting the killer to the investigation's progress. The geographic scope of Elizabeth's movements in her final days, spanning from Hollywood to downtown Los Angeles, and involving numerous locations and witnesses, created an investigation of enormous complexity. The killer could have encountered Elizabeth at any of these locations, through any of her numerous social connections, making it virtually impossible to identify a clear pathway to the crime. Perhaps, most frustratingly, the evidence suggests that Elizabeth Short's killer may have been hiding in plain sight. Someone with medical training, someone familiar with the Los Angeles area, someone who had the opportunity to encounter Elizabeth during her extensive social activities. This profile describes thousands of potential suspects in 1947 Los Angeles, making identification without additional evidence extremely challenging. The Black Dahlia case has generated countless theories over the decades, from allegations involving prominent figures to suggestions of organized crime connections to speculation about serial killers. However, none of these theories has produced evidence sufficient to solve the case conclusively. What remains clear is that Elizabeth Short's murder represents a convergence of factors that created the perfect, unsolvable crime. A victim whose lifestyle brought her into contact with numerous potential perpetrators. A killer with the skills and knowledge necessary to commit the crime without leaving identifying evidence. And an investigation that, despite its thoroughness and innovation, could not overcome the limitations of 1940s forensic science and detective work. The case continues to fascinate researchers, investigators, and amateur sleuths because it represents the ultimate cold case, a crime where we know virtually everything about what happened, but cannot identify who did it. The evidence tells us about the killer's skills, psychology, and methods, but it cannot tell us their name. Elizabeth Short's story serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of young women pursuing dreams in a dangerous world, the complexity of human relationships and motivations, and the limitations of even the most dedicated investigative efforts. Her murder remains one of America's most notorious unsolved crimes, a mystery that continues to challenge our understanding of justice, closure, and the human capacity for both love and evil. As we close this examination of the Black Dahlia case, we're left not with answers, but with a deeper appreciation for the complexity of criminal investigation and the enduring power of unsolved mysteries to capture our imagination and challenge our assumptions about crime, punishment, and the nature of truth itself. If the unanswered questions of the Black Dahlia case leave you wanting more, you're not alone. For those drawn to the lingering shadows of history's coldest cases, Scoob is the perfect next step. Available now on the App Store and Google Play, Scoob brings you deep-diving podcasts that explore unsolved murders, investigative missteps, and the mysteries related to the JonBenet Ramsey case, the Lindbergh kidnapping, and more. Download Scoob today and keep following the clues. And now, coming back to the Black Dahlia case, we're reminded that some stories stay with us, not because they're solved, but because they never were. The Black Dahlia case represents more than just an unsolved murder. It's a window into post-war America, a study in the evolution of criminal investigation, and a tragic reminder of dreams deferred and lives cut short. Elizabeth Short's story continues to resonate because it embodies themes that remain relevant today: the vulnerability of those pursuing fame and fortune, the dangerous intersection of fantasy and reality, and the complex relationships between victims, predators, and the society that surrounds them. From the horrific discovery in that vacant lot on Norton Avenue, to the sophisticated forensic analysis that followed, from the rapid technological identification to the complex web of relationships that investigators spent years trying to unravel, the Black Dahlia case marked a turning point in American criminal justice. The collaboration between journalists and law enforcement, the use of cutting-edge technology for victim identification, and the extensive media coverage that followed all set new precedents for how major crimes would be investigated and reported in the modern era. Yet despite these advances, despite the dedication of investigators like Ray Pinker and Dr. Lemoyne Snyder, despite the thorough witness canvass and extensive forensic analysis, Elizabeth Short's killer remains unknown. The case serves as a humbling reminder that even the most sophisticated investigative techniques cannot always overcome the fundamental challenges of proving guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Elizabeth Short's legacy lies not just in the mystery of her death, but in the impact her case had on criminal investigation, forensic science, and media coverage of major crimes. Her story continues to inspire new generations of investigators, researchers, and storytellers who refuse to let her memory fade into obscurity. As we remember Elizabeth Short, we honor not just the victim of a brutal crime, but a young woman whose dreams and aspirations were shared by countless others seeking their fortune in the City of Angels. Her story reminds us that behind every headline, every case file, and every cold case database entry is a human being whose life had meaning beyond the circumstances of their death. The Black Dahlia case may never be solved, but Elizabeth Short's story will continue to be told. Her case will continue to be examined, and her memory will endure as long as people seek justice for the innocent and answers to the mysteries that challenge our understanding of human nature. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most notorious unsolved crimes. Until next time, remember that every victim deserves justice, every case deserves investigation, and every mystery deserves our continued attention and respect.